Have you ever stopped to think about what a mother is capable of doing when she sees her children hungry? I'm not talking about heroism, grand gestures, or cinematic courage. I'm talking about that kind of silent despair that no one sees, that no one talks about, but that corrodes from within. The kind that makes a woman work 12 hours a day and still come home empty-handed, trying to invent excuses to explain why there's no food on the table again. Maria knew exactly what that weight was. Like, she carried it every day, hidden behind a tired smile and a posture that pretended everything was fine. But that night, when she closed that lunchbox with leftover roast chicken that was going straight to the trash, her hand trembled. Not from fear, from shame. Because she knew she was crossing an invisible line, if that line made no sense at all. Have you ever felt like the whole world is against you, even when you haven't done anything wrong? Maria felt that way every day. A waitress. For 4 years at the same roadside restaurant, a single mother of 2 young boys who depended solely on her. She was the kind of woman who goes unnoticed. Nobody asked how she was. Nobody noticed her worn-out shoes, her purse patched with cheap sewing thread, or the fact that she never ever ate during her shift. She just served, cleaned, smiled when necessary, and at the end of her shift, took home what nobody wanted. The leftovers. What would have gone to waste anyway? Food that would have been thrown away, but which, for her, meant the difference between her children going to bed hungry or not. Until the day someone decided that it was a crime. The manager's voice cut through the kitchen silence like a cold blade. "What are you taking there, Maria?" She froze. Her heart raced. The words escaped her throat. She tried to explain, tried to say it was just leftovers, that it was going to the trash anyway, that nobody cared before. But he wouldn't listen. He had already decided. And 2 hours later, Maria was sitting in a cold room at the police station, staring at a policeman filling out a form with the word theft stamped at the top. She didn't cry, not in front of them, but inside, something shattered. Because while she was there, trapped in that hard plastic chair, her children were at home, waiting. Waiting for the mother who always came back. Waiting for the dinner that wasn't coming. Waiting for someone who, at that moment, didn't know if she still had the strength to go on. Stay with me until the end, because this story isn't about food, it's about dignity. About what happens when a woman is pushed to her limit and the world decides she doesn't deserve even the crumbs. But it's also about something Maria didn't yet know that cold night at the police station, something that was about to change everything. Because while she sat there, invisible as always, afraid of losing her children, and not knowing how she would get out of this, someone was paying attention. Someone saw what no one else wanted to see. And that someone had a name tag on their chest, a gun in their holster, and an impossible choice ahead of them. Sheriff Hank Lawson wasn't the type to be easily moved. 30 years on the police force teach you to toughen up, to be suspicious, to look at people and see first what they're hiding, not who they are. He'd seen it all: professional thieves with saintly faces, liars who cried real tears, people who pretended to be victims just to escape blame. So, when he picked up that night's report and read theft of food, he didn't even blink. Just another one. Routine, protocol. Until he looked up and saw Maria. She sat in that plastic chair with the posture of someone who wanted to disappear. Her eyes were red, her hands tightly clasped in her lap, trying to hold on to something that had already broken inside. She wasn't crying. But Hank knew that kind of silence, the silence of someone who had cried so much that there was nothing. Lefty looked at her file. Leftover food. He frowned. He looked at her again. He saw her shoes, worn to the point of exhaustion, her patched bag, her short, clean fingernails, the kind someone who works with their hands needs. And then he saw something none of his colleagues had seen: shame. Not for having been caught, but for being there. For needing that. Hank felt something churn in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. If you've ever been through something similar, if you've Ever felt like the system failed you when you needed it most? Share in the comments. Because I know it's not just Maria's story. It's the story of many people watching this right now. He didn't say anything that night. He just wrote her address on a yellow post-it note and stuffed it in his shirt pocket. He finished his shift, went home, but couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those eyes, that silence, and the words she had said when the detective asked if she understood the accusation. "I understand, sir, but my children don't." Her voice was calm, tired, defeated, as if she already knew that no one would believe her, as if she had already given up before even trying to defend herself. The next morning, Hank did something that wasn't protocol. He went to her house, not in uniform, not in a patrol car, just him, under the pretext of clarifying some points about the incident. But the truth was different. He needed to understand. He needed to see with his own eyes what that woman was hiding or what the world was hiding from her. When he stopped in front of that small house, with peeling paint and a gate that didn't even close properly, his stomach clenched. It wasn't blatant misery. It was worse. It was silent misery. The kind no one sees because no one wants to see it. He knocked on the door. A boy of about 6 answered, barefoot, wearing a t-shirt 3 sizes too big for him. The boy looked at Hank with those big, curious, innocent eyes, and hungry. Hank recognized them. He had grown up with that same look. "Is your mom here?" The boy nodded and ran off. Hank stood there, in the half-open doorway, and watched. The living room was empty. The sofa was torn. The refrigerator in the kitchen was opened completely empty, except for a half-empty bottle of water. The smell of mold mixed with cheap disinfectant. And in the corner, 2 pairs of children's sneakers, one on top of the other, as if the boys were taking turns wearing the only decent pair. Maria came, running in, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face pale with fright. "Sheriff, I'm sorry. The house is a mess. I wasn't expecting visitors. She was apologizing. Why? For being poor? For just surviving?" Hank raised his hand, asking for calm. "No need, ma'am. I just came to ask a question." He looked her in the eyes, and asked the only question that mattered. "When was the last time you ate properly?" Maria opened her mouth, closed it, her eyes filled with tears that she didn't let fall. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The answer was there, in the empty house, in the thin boys, in the heavy silence that fell between them. Hank understood everything. And at that moment, something inside him changed. He was no longer just the sheriff investigating a theft case. He was a man watching a woman being crushed by a world that never cared about her. If this part touched you, leave a like below. Because this story is just beginning, and I need you to stay with me until the end. Hank didn't go into the house. He didn't want to break in any further than he already had. But before leaving, he did something no police officer should do. He took 2 $50 bills from his pocket and placed them in her hand. "It's not a donation. It's an advance." Maria looked at him, confused, frightened. "An advance for what?" Hank gave a half smile, the first in years. "For the day the world pays you back for everything it owes you." And he left, leaving Maria standing there, holding that money as if it were gold, while tears finally fell. But what neither of them knew yet was that the restaurant manager wasn't finished. He wouldn't stand for being contradicted, much less by a waitress who had dared to refuse his advances. And while Hank drove back to the police station, a far more dangerous mechanism was being set in motion. Because in small towns, revenge doesn't come fast. It comes slowly, calculated, and it always strikes where it hurts most. If you want to follow the rest of this story and find out how far the sheriff will go to protect Maria, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what comes next will change everything. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because to understand what happened to Maria, you need to understand who she was before everything fell apart, before the police station, before the accusation, before fear took over. Maria wasn't a victim by choice. She was invisible out of necessity. You know that type of person who goes through life trying not to make noise, not to draw attention, not to bother anyone. That was her. For years waiting tables at the same roadside restaurant, always with her uniform impeccable even though it was the same one every time. Always with a polite smile even when her body screamed with exhaustion. She took the shifts that nobody wanted, Friday nights, Sunday mornings, holidays, because every extra reel meant one more day that the boys wouldn't go to bed hungry. What nobody knew, what nobody saw, was the journey she made every day. 3 kilometers on foot, there and back. 6 kilometers a day, with a pair of shoes that no longer had proper soles. Because the bus fare was the difference between buying rice or buying nothing at all. She left home at 5 in the morning, leaving the children still sleeping, with the neighbor a retired lady who charged little because she felt sorry for them. Man walked silently through the empty streets as the sun rose. On the way back, it was already night. Her feet ached, her legs trembled, but she didn't complain, because who did she complain to? Who cared? Nobody at the restaurant asked why Maria never ate during her shift. They thought it was fussiness, a diet, I don't know. The truth was simple and brutal. She didn't eat because she couldn't afford it. Her salary barely covered the rent and bills. What was left went straight to the boys. Milk, bread, the bare minimum. And when there was nothing left, she made up excuses. I already ate at home. I'm not hungry. I'll eat later. Lies she repeated so often she almost believed them. But her stomach didn't lie. It ached, it complained, it begged, and she ignored it, because that's what mothers do. Mothers hold back the pain, swallow the despair, and smile at their children as if everything were all right. And it was in this context, in this invisible reality, that Maria began to take the leftovers. It wasn't planned, it wasn't theft, it was survival. The end of the workday, when the manager left and the kitchen was empty. She took what was going straight to the trash. Leftover pieces of chicken from the buffet, rice that nobody wanted, potatoes that had gotten cold. Perfectly good food that would have been thrown away anyway. But for her and the boys, it was the difference between a meal and another sleepless night. She did it with shame, with fear, but she did it. Because when you see your children hungry, dignity becomes a luxury you can no longer afford. Nobody cared. Or rather, nobody cared until they did. Until the day the manager decided it mattered. And why? Not because of principles, not because of rules, but because a week before, Maria had done something unforgivable in his eyes. She had said no. He had leaned against her in the cold storage room with that disgusting smile, with those hands that didn't ask permission, and she had pushed him away. She had looked him in the eyes and said, with a firmness she didn't even know she possessed, "Don't touch me." He laughed. He thought it was a joke. He tried again, and she left. Left him there, alone, with his ego wounded and his anger growing. And small men, cowardly men, don't forget when a woman rejects them. It was revenge, pure and simple. When he saw her closing that lunchbox, he didn't think twice. It wasn't about food. It was about power. About putting her in her place. About showing that he could destroy her life with a phone call. And that's exactly what he did. He called the police, invented a history of constant thefts, exaggerated the value, turned leftovers into a crime. And Maria, who already carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, now also carried an accusation that could take away the only thing that still mattered, her children. Because the real danger wasn't the police station, it wasn't the trial, it was what came after. Social services, risk assessment, cold forms filled out by people who had never set foot in a house like hers, who had never felt the weight of choosing between food and dignity. On paper, Maria was a negligent mother, inadequate housing, prosecuted for theft, no stable rent, no family support, and the system, this system that should protect, only saw numbers, only saw risk. It didn't see the woman who woke up at 5 in the morning. It didn't see the mother who walked 6 kilometers a day. It didn't see the boys who loved her more than anything in the world. The transformation that happened to Maria in those days was silent but devastating. She had always been strong, the kind of strength that no one sees, that makes no noise, that doesn't ask for recognition. But this time, her strength began to crack. For the first time in years, she thought about giving up. Not on life, but on fighting. Because what was the point? She worked. She humbled herself. She accepted the bare minimum. And even so, the world found a way to take even the crumbs from her. She looked at her sleeping children and thought, wouldn't they be better off somewhere else? With another family, with someone who can give them what I can't. And that's when something began to change. Not in her, but around her. Because while Maria sank into this abyss of despair, Hank was doing something he had never done before. He was questioning everything. The law he swore to uphold. The system he had always respected. The line between right and wrong that suddenly didn't seem so clear anymore. He went back to her house 3 times that week, always with an excuse. I need to confirm some information. I forgot to ask something. But the truth was, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in a romantic way, not yet. It was something deeper, more human. He saw in her something he had lost a long time ago. The purity of someone who still believed that doing the right thing was worthwhile, even when the whole world said otherwise. The boys began to like him. The oldest, Lucas, would ask when the police officer was coming back. The youngest, David, would show him the drawings he made at school. And Maria, little by little, began to trust him, not because he promised to save her, but because he didn't promise anything. He just showed up. He fixed the leaky faucet. He brought a bag of rice left over from his shopping trip. He would sit on the porch after the boys went to sleep and just listen. He listened to her talk about her ex-husband who disappeared, about her family who lived far away, about the tiredness that never went away. And Hank, for the first time in decades, didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. He just stayed. And Maria realized that sometimes presence is worth more than promises. But the danger was growing. The manager hadn't stopped. He pressured the restaurant owner to sue Maria civilly. He spread rumors around town. She'd been stealing for a long time. I always suspected something. These single women are all the same, and people believed it. Because it's easier to believe that someone invisible is guilty than to admit you never cared. The social worker scheduled a visit. Maria panicked. She cleaned the house until her hands bled. She borrowed money to buy food and fill the refrigerator, just for one day, just to make it seem like everything was okay. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. And Hank knew it too. He felt the impact of every decision he had to make. He could follow protocol, let the system run its course, and Maria would probably lose her children. Or he could cross the line, use the authority he had to protect someone the system had abandoned, risk his career, his reputation, everything, for a woman he barely knew, but who somehow had awakened something in him that he thought had died, the will to do the right thing, even when it was the hardest thing. Their emotional journey ceased to be solely about survival. It became about redemption, about 2 broken human beings finding in each other the strength to continue. Maria saw in Hank something she never had, someone who believed in her. And Hank saw in Maria something he had forgotten, what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because what happened to Maria wasn't just injustice, it was systematic betrayal by an entire world that should have protected her. You know that moment when you realize you're completely alone, that all the safety net society promises simply don't exist for you. That's what Maria felt when she understood the hidden truth behind it all. No one was going to show up to save her. The manager hadn't called the police out of moral principles or because he cared about the restaurant's rules. He called because his ego had been wounded. Because a woman, a waitress, someone he saw as inferior, Someone he thought he could touch whenever he wanted had dared to say no. And in his distorted mind, that needed to be punished. His revenge was calculated, surgical, cowardly. He didn't just call the police. He constructed a narrative. He invented a history. He said Maria had been stealing for months, that he always suspected her, that he had evidence of other thefts. He lied with such conviction that even the police officers who recorded the incident believed him. And worst of all, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that an accusation of theft, even if it was about leftover food, would tarnish her name forever. It would appear in background checks. It would weigh against her in any social services evaluation. It would transform her, in the eyes of the system, into a criminal. And all because she had had the audacity to defend her own body. Maria's coworkers, they knew. They all knew. They knew the manager was a predator. They knew he harassed the female employees. They knew Maria hadn't done anything more than take food that was going to be thrown away because they all did the same thing from time to time. But when the police showed up, when the questions started, they turned their faces away, one by one. I don't want to get involved. I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. Because getting involved meant risking their own jobs. It meant becoming the manager's target. It meant putting their own safety at risk. And in the end, for them, Maria's life wasn't worth that price. Maria understood at that moment a brutal truth about the world. Female solidarity only exists when it costs nothing. When it costs jobs, when it costs peace, when it costs comfort, people disappear. And she didn't blame them, not completely. She understood. She would probably do the same if the roles were reversed. But understanding didn't lessen the pain. It didn't make the loneliness any less devastating. She had worked alongside those women for 4 years. They shared shifts, laughter, complaints, and when she needed them, when she really needed them, they abandoned her. That hurt more than the accusation itself. Her ex-husband, he'd disappeared 2 years ago. He simply woke up one day, looked at the life he'd built, wife, 2 children, responsibilities, and decided he didn't want it anymore. There was no argument, no fight, he just left. He left a note on the kitchen table. I can't take it anymore. I'm sorry. And Maria stayed there, pregnant with her second child, with a 3-year-old boy clinging to her leg, trying to understand how someone could simply give up like that. She tried to find him. She called his family. Nothing. He had erased all traces. He changed cities, phone numbers, his life, and Maria was left with the bill. Literally and figuratively. The debts, the rent, the diapers, the food, everything. Alone. Her family lived in another state. Her elderly mother could barely take care of herself. Her brother had his own family to support and had never been very helpful anyway. She called them when it all started, when the accusation came, when despair set in. Her mother cried on the phone, saying she wanted to help but couldn't. Her brother was more direct. You got yourself into this. Now you have to fend for yourself. As if she had chosen it. As if poverty were a decision. As if survival were a crime. Maria hung up the phone and realized she had no one. Literally no one. It was just her, the boys, and the abyss. And then came the final blow. When the police report was filed, the word robbery appeared in the system, not misappropriation of leftover food, not labor dispute, robbery. And that word carries weight. It has history. It has consequences. Maria now had a record, a criminal record. And that changed everything, because the system doesn't forgive. The system doesn't understand context. The system sees robbery and draws conclusions. Mother prosecuted for robbery, inadequate housing, no stable income, no family support. The boxers were being ticked one by one, and each tick was another step towards losing her children. The social worker who showed up at her house wasn't bad. She wasn't cruel. She was just tired. Tired of seeing misery. Tired of trying to save people the system had already condemned. She looked around the house with that trained, clinical eye that assesses everything and sees nothing. She noted poor conditions, insufficient income, recent criminal history. She asked Maria, "Do you have family support? Anyone who can help with the children?" And Maria, her voice trembling, replied, "No, ma'am. Just me." The social worker sighed. A sigh that said it all. A sigh Maria recognized immediately. It was the sigh of someone who had already decided. That night, after the woman left, Maria sat on the kitchen floor and finally broke down. She cried like she hadn't cried in years. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a cry of utter exhaustion, of defeat, of surrender. She had fought, she had worked, she had done everything she could, and yet the world had found a way to tell her she wasn't enough, that her children deserved better, that she, in the end, was the problem. And perhaps, she thought in that moment of weakness, perhaps they were right. Perhaps the boys really did deserve more than she could give. It was at this point in the journey that Hank began to see not only the injustice of the system, but the silent cruelty of a world that abandons the most vulnerable. He investigated, he spoke with Maria's co-workers, all of whom refused to speak officially, but behind the scenes, in hidden corners, they confirmed everything. The harassment, the revenge, the setup. Hank went to the restaurant, reviewed the security cameras. He saw Maria taking the leftovers, yes, but he also saw the manager watching, waiting, planning the right moment to act. It was premeditated. It was pure evil. Hank felt something stir within him. Anger, but not explosive, uncontrolled anger. It was the cold, calculated anger of someone who knows exactly what needs to be done and is willing to pay the price. He returned to the precinct, locked the office door, and stared at the plaque on the wall. To serve and protect. How many times had he read that? Hundreds, thousands. But had he truly understood what it meant? Serve whom? Protect whom? The system, the laws, or the people the laws should protect but don't. He thought about his career. 30 years of impeccable service. A reputation built brick by brick. Respect, authority, all of that could crumble if he crossed the line. If he used his position to interfere in an active case. If he put Maria's protection above protocol. But then he thought about the boys. About Lucas asking when he was coming back. About David showing his drawings. About the way they looked at him as if he were a hero. And he thought about Maria. About her eyes. About her weariness. About the strength no one saw. About the dignity the world had tried to crush, but that still shone, weak but present. The decision wasn't instantaneous, it was gradual. It was built up with each visit, with each conversation. With each moment he saw Maria fighting against a world that offered no respite. And when he finally decided, it wasn't because he was sure he was right. It was because he was sure that standing still was wrong. And sometimes, in life, you don't choose between right and wrong. You choose between two wrongs and hope to choose the lesser of two evils. The impact of that decision reverberated far beyond the two of them. Because when someone in a position of power chooses to side with the weak, chooses to challenge the system, chooses to risk everything for someone no one else cares about, it creates ripples, small ones at first, but ripples nonetheless. And Maria felt it. She felt that for the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because he believed she deserved it. And that feeling, that validation, began to heal something in her that had been broken for years. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened inside Hank that night was something he couldn't explain, even to himself. It wasn't passion, it wasn't attraction, it was recognition. You know, when you look at someone and see something that reminds you of who you were before the world hardened you, that's what it was. Hank had 30 years of police work behind him. 30 years seeing the worst of humanity. Thieves, aggressors, liars, manipulators. He had developed such a thick emotional armor, that even he no longer knew where the policeman ended and the man began. Suspicion was instinct, questioning was protocol, and feeling was a luxury he couldn't afford. But when he entered that cold room in the police station and saw Maria sitting in that plastic chair, something cracked. She wasn't crying that he noticed first. Most of the people who passed by were crying, screaming, defending themselves, making a scene. Maria was silent. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white, her eyes were red, yes, but dry. Her posture was erect, as if she were making a conscious effort not to collapse. And Hank recognized it. It was pride. Not the arrogant pride of someone who thinks they are better than others. It was the wounded pride of someone being humiliated and knowing they don't deserve it, but who doesn't have the strength to fight back. He took the report from the officer on duty. He read it silently. Misappropriation of food. He frowned. He turned the page. Suspect, Maria Santos, 34 years old, waitress. He continued reading. Items taken, leftover food intended for disposal. He stopped. He reread it. Leftover food, intended for disposal. And someone had called the police about that. He looked at her again, now with different eyes. He observed the details his colleagues hadn't seen because they didn't want to see them. The shoes, worn out beyond repair. The soles almost detached, patched. With glue, the bag, old, faded synthetic leather, with a strap patched with thick thread. Her nails, short, clean, but dry. Hands of someone who works hard. And then he saw her posture. The way she was sitting, trying to occupy as little space as possible. As if she didn't want to be there. As if she wanted to disappear. Hank felt a tightening in his chest. It wasn't pity. He hated pity. Pity is condescending. Pity is looking down on someone. This was something else. It was shame. Shame at being part of a system that put women like Maria in a police station chair for trying to feed their children. Shame at wearing a uniform that should protect, but that at that moment was being used to punish. He looked at his colleagues around him. No one questioned it. No one found it strange. Protocol. It was always about protocol. And Hank, for the first time in decades, questioned whether the protocol was right. He didn't say anything at that moment. He couldn't, not in front of the others. But he took a yellow post-it note, wrote her address in firm handwriting, and put it in his shirt pocket. Why? He didn't know yet. Instinct, perhaps. Or perhaps it was something bigger. Something he had buried so long ago that he had almost forgotten it existed. The desire to make a difference. To not just be another cog in the machine. To choose, at least once, the right side, even if it was the most difficult side. That night, Hank went home, but he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and all he saw were her eyes, red, tired, but firm. There was something in those eyes that deeply bothered him, because he had seen it before, a long time ago. In his own mother, Hank had grown up poor, not the romantic poverty of movies, real poverty, the kind that hurts, the kind that shames, the kind that teaches you from a young age that the world wasn't made for you. His mother had raised him and his two brothers alone after their father left and never returned. She worked 3 jobs. She cleaned houses during the day, washed dishes at night, and on weekends she did sewing work for others. And even then, there were nights when there was no food. And she did what Maria did. She accepted the leftovers. She took what they were going to throw away. She humiliated herself, silently, so that her children wouldn't go hungry. Hank remembered one particular night. He must have been about 7 years old. He came home and saw his mother crying in the kitchen, hiding. Thinking he wouldn't see, he asked what had happened. She quickly wiped away her tears and smiled. Nothing, son. Everything's fine. But he knew, even as a child, he knew. Someone had humiliated her. Someone had made her feel small. And she swallowed it, alone, because she had no choice. Because mothers do that. They carry the pain so that their children don't have to. And they're lying in bed, Hank realized why he couldn't get Maria out of his head. She was his mother. Not literally, but symbolically, she was all the women the world crushes and expects to keep smiling. She was all the mothers who humiliate themselves in silence because loving their children hurts more than anything. And Hank, who had spent his entire life serving a system that frequently failed people like his mother, finally had the chance to do things differently, to not turn his back, to not blindly follow protocol, to choose the person instead of the rule. The next morning, he woke up with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He was going to investigate, not just prosecute the case, but really investigate, understand, see with his own eyes. Because something deep inside him, something that training never managed to completely kill, told him there was much more to this story than a simple theft. And he was right. When he arrived at her house, when he knocked on that door and saw the barefoot boy, when he smelled the musty odor mixed with despair, when he saw the empty refrigerator, he knew he had made the right choice. He knew Maria wasn't a criminal. She was a victim of an economic system that doesn't pay decent wages, a victim of a cowardly ex-husband, a victim of a predatory manager, a victim of a society that pretends to care about children but abandons the mothers who try to raise them. And when he looked into her eyes that morning, when he asked that question, "When was the last time you two ate properly?" and she couldn't answer, Hank felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not the empty purpose of following orders, but the real purpose of protecting someone who truly needed protection. And there, on that broken porch, with two frightened boys peering through the window, and a woman trying not to fall apart in front of a stranger, something was born. Not love, not yet, but the seed of it. The seed of a connection neither of them was looking for, but both desperately needed. Hank wasn't a man of grand gestures. He never was. But in the days that followed, he began to show up, always with an excuse, always casual. "I was just passing by. It was left over from my shopping. I thought you might use it." He fixed the faucet. He changed the burnt-out light bulb in the living room. He brought a bag of rice, another of beans, never making it seem like charity, always making it seem like a coincidence. Because he knew, because his mother had taught him that pride is the last thing poor people have, and taking that away from them is cruel. Maria resisted at first. Of course she resisted. She didn't want to owe favors. She didn't want to feel like a burden. But little by little she realized something. Hank wasn't there out of pity. He was there because he wanted to be. Because he saw her, not as a victim, not as a case, but as a person. As a woman, as a mother, as a human being who deserved dignity. And that realization changed something inside her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. For the first time, someone had chosen to look at her when everyone else turned their faces away. Comment below, this makes sense to me. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because that moment at Maria's door was the turning point, not just for him, but for her as well. It was the moment when two completely different lives collided and created something new. Something neither of them was prepared to handle. Hank had gone there intending to investigate, to confirm suspicions, to fill in the gaps in the case. He was a police officer. That's what police officers did. But the second that boy opened the door barefoot, with those big, dark eyes that carried a hunger that went beyond his stomach, everything changed. Because Hank didn't see a suspect. He didn't see a case. He saw raw humanity, unfiltered, without social makeup. And that completely disarmed him. The boy looked at him with curiosity mixed with fear. Poor children learn early to distrust unfamiliar adults, especially adults in positions of authority. Hank crouched down, trying to get to the boy's level, trying to appear less threatening. "Hey champ, is your mom here?" The boy nodded and ran off, leaving the door ajar. And it was through that crack, that small space, that Hank saw. He saw the stark reality. The smell of mold hit first, not the strong mold of an abandoned place, but that persistent mold of dampness that never dries because the house lacks proper ventilation, because the roof leaks, because there's no money to fix it. Then came the vision. The almost empty living room. An old, torn sofa, patched up with brown tape. A small, old television on the floor. And through the half-open kitchen door, the refrigerator. Open, empty. Just a half-empty bottle of water and a plastic container with something he couldn't identify. Maria came running, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face pale with fright. "Sheriff, I'm sorry. The house is I didn't expect." She was apologizing. Why? For being poor? For living in a house that barely had furniture? For existing? Hank felt a dull anger rising in his chest. Not at her, at the world, at the system, at everything that had pushed that woman to that point and still had the audacity to judge her. He raised his hand gently, asking her to stop. "No need to apologize, ma'am. I didn't come here as sheriff. I came as someone trying to understand." And it was true. For the first time in decades, Hank had mentally taken off his uniform. He wasn't there as a representative of the law. He was there as a human being, trying to connect with another human being. Maria stopped talking. She just looked at him, trying to decipher if it was a trap, if he was playing some kind of psychological interrogation game. But his eyes were honest. Tired, but honest. And she, who had learned to distrust everyone, felt something strange. Trust, not complete, not yet, but the beginning of it. A crack in the armor she had built around her heart. Hank didn't enter the house. He knew that would be too invasive. He stood there, on the doorstep, and asked the only question that mattered. "When was the last time you two ate properly?" The silence that followed was deafening. Maria opened her mouth, closed it, tried to form words, but they wouldn't come out. How do you answer a question like that? How do you admit aloud that your children go to bed hungry? That you, as a mother, the person who should protect them from everything, can't even provide the basics? Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She bit her lip, averted her gaze, and in that gesture, in that inability to answer, Hank had all the answers he needed. It had been days, maybe a week, maybe more, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that that woman hadn't taken those leftovers out of greed or dishonesty. She had taken them out of desperation, out of love, out of maternal survival instinct. At that moment, something fundamental changed within Hank Lawson. The transformation wasn't dramatic. There was no background music, no enlightened epiphany, no cinematic moment. It was quiet. It was internal. It was profound. He ceased to be just the investigator, the sheriff, the representative of the law. He became an accomplice. Not of a crime, because deep down, he already knew no crime had been committed, but an accomplice to a truth the system preferred to ignore, that people are falling through the cracks of society every day, and that the laws he swore to uphold often push those people deeper, instead of lifting them up. He took his wallet out of his pocket. Maria instinctively recoiled, thinking he was going to show her some document, some order, something official that would make things worse. But he simply took out 50 real notes and held them out to her. "It's not a donation. It's an advance." Maria looked at him as if he were speaking another language. An advance for what? Her voice came out weak, confused, full of a cautious hope she didn't want to feel, because hope hurts when it's crushed. Hank gave a small smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a sad smile, heavy with understanding, with something he couldn't yet name. "For the day the world will pay you back for everything it owes you." Maria stood there, holding the money as if it were gold, as if it were oxygen, as if it were the first good thing that had happened in months. And perhaps it was. The tears she had been holding back finally fell, silently, streaming down her face as she pressed the bills against her chest. Hank saw this and felt his heart clench in a way he hadn't felt in decades. Not since his ex-wife had left. Not since he had shut down that part of himself that felt. But there, Seeing Maria cry with gratitude for something so basic, so minimal, he realized he had spent years living only half a life, functioning, but not living. He left there changed, not physically, but energetically, emotionally, spiritually, if he believed in such things. And Maria changed because for the first time in years, someone had chosen to see her. Not as a problem, not as a statistic, but as a person, as a mother, as a woman who deserved dignity. And that validation, that simple recognition of her humanity, began to heal wounds in her that she didn't even know she had. In the days that followed, Hank began to appear more frequently, never announced, never expected. He simply showed up, always with some excuse. A bag of rice that was left over from his shopping trip, beans that he bought too much of by mistake, chicken that was on sale and he wasn't going to use it all. Maria knew they were polite lies, but she accepted them because she needed to, and because, little by little, she was learning that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was survival. It was allowing someone to care. The boys began to like him. Lucas, the oldest, would wait at the window. Is the policeman coming today? David, the youngest, would show them the drawings he made at school, dinosaurs, cars, rockets, things boys draw when they still believe the world is magical. And Hank looked at those drawings with a genuine attention that made Maria's heart ache, because she saw in her son's eyes what they never had, a father figure, someone who showed up, someone trustworthy, someone who wouldn't disappear overnight. One night, after the boys were asleep, they sat on the porch. There were no chairs, so they sat on the cold cement floor, Maria with her legs crossed, Hank with his back against the peeling wall. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists between people who are beginning to understand each other without needing words. It was Maria who broke the silence. And when she began to speak, it was as if a dam had burst. She told everything. The marriage, the man she thought she loved, who promised to take care of her, who ran away at the first sign of trouble. The pregnancy alone, David's premature birth, the sleepless nights, the double shifts, the exhaustion that never, ever went away, the loneliness, the shame, the constant fear of not being enough. Hank listened in silence. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer cheap solutions. He didn't say everything will be all right because maybe it wouldn't be. He just listened. And when she finished, when her voice finally failed and she stood there, staring into nothingness, exhausted from exposing herself so much, he said only one thing. You are stronger than anyone I know. And he believed it. Every word. Because he had seen courage in many forms during his career. Police officers facing shootouts, firefighters entering burning buildings. But none of that compared to the silent courage of a mother who wakes up every day, even without hope, and continues fighting for her children. Maria turned to him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to be completely vulnerable. She let the tears fall without trying to hide them. She let her body tremble. She let the weight of years of struggle show. And Hank, without thinking, without planning, reached out and pulled her close. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sexual. It was human. It was a hug from someone who understands pain because they've felt it themselves. And Maria allowed herself to melt in that hug, just for a moment, just enough to remember that she wasn't completely alone. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because while Maria and Hank were building this fragile connection, a storm was brewing behind the scenes. It was coming fast. The manager hadn't stopped at the accusation. That wasn't enough for him. Because for men like him, humiliation once isn't enough. They need to destroy. They need to ensure that the woman who dared to reject them never raises her head again. So he went further, much further. He sought out the restaurant owner, wealthy, distant man who barely knew the employees by name, and painted a picture, a false, but convincing picture she's been stealing for months. Other employees confirmed it. This could turn into a scandal. damaged the establishment's reputation. We need to protect ourselves. The owner, who only cared about numbers and public image, believed it. Why wouldn't he? A trustworthy manager versus a disposable waitress. The choice was obvious. And so, without hesitation, he authorized a civil lawsuit. Not for justice, for corporate precaution, for fear of negative headlines. Maria didn't even know this was happening until she received the notification. A brown envelope left at the door, with an official stamp and words she could barely understand. Civil action for moral damages. Estimated value, 50,000 reals, 50,000 reais. She read that number 5 times and couldn't process it. It was more money than she had ever seen in her entire life. It was the end. But the worst was yet to come. Because while the civil process moved forward, slow but relentless, another gear was set in motion. The social worker returned. This time, it wasn't a courtesy visit. It was a formal assessment. She arrived with a clipboard, a printed form, and that professional gaze that sees no people, only criteria. She walked through the house, noting everything. Water damage in the ceiling, mold on the walls, lack of adequate furniture, insufficiently stocked refrigerator. Maria followed behind her, trying to explain, trying to contextualize. I work, I take care of them. They are healthy, they go to school. But her words were useless. Because on paper, in the cold forms of the system, Maria was a risk. A mother sued for theft and moral damages. A house in precarious conditions, unstable income, no family support network. The social worker finished the inspection and looked at Maria with that expression that professionals in the field develop half sympathy, half resignation. Mrs. Santos, I need to be honest with you. The report I'm going to send it won't be favorable. And with the criminal and now the civil proceedings, there's a real probability that the children's custody will be reevaluated. Maria felt the ground disappear from beneath her feet. The words echoed in her head like gunshots. Custody reevaluated. What did that mean? That they were going to take the boys away? That they were going to put them in a shelter? In foster care? Far away from her? In how much time? Maria's voice came out hoarse, desperate. The social worker hesitated. Days, maybe a week, at most. Maria panicked. Not the noisy, hysterical kind of panic. The silent, paralyzing kind. The kind of panic that makes you question your own sanity. She spent the night awake, sitting on the floor of the boys' room, just watching them sleep. Lucas snored softly, hugging a faded teddy bear. David slept with his mouth open, his little hands sticking out from under the thin blanket. And Maria looked at them thinking, will I lose this? Will I wake up one day and they won't be here anymore? The pain of that possibility was physical. It was a blade in her chest. It was suffocation. It was a living death. The next morning, Maria made a desperate decision. She went looking for help. She sought out her former employer, a woman who always said Maria was like family, who always praised her work. She knocked on the door of the main house, waited in the back entrance like the maid she was, and when the woman appeared, Maria pleaded. Literally pleaded. Please, I need a letter of recommendation, someone to speak for me, to say that I'm a good mother, that I take care of them, please. The woman listened in silence, and then, with an embarrassed smile, said, Maria, I would love to help, but you understand, right? I have my reputation to think about. If I get involved in a criminal case, I can't, I'm sorry. And she closed the door. Maria stood there, frozen in the service entrance, staring at the closed door, feeling the humiliation burn in her throat. She had worked for that woman for 3 years. She had cleaned her house, cared for her children, cooked for her parties. And now, when Maria needed something really needed, if the answer was, I can't. The hidden truth behind all those kind words, all those compliments, was this. Maria only mattered as long as she was useful. And now that she was a problem, she was disposable. But Maria didn't give up. She went to the public defender's office. She waited in line for 3 hours. When she was finally seen, she explained the whole situation to a young, exhausted lawyer who handled dozens of cases a day. The lawyer listened, flipped through some papers, and sighed. "Ma'am, I'll be direct. Your case is indefensible. You admitted to taking the items. You have witnesses. And now there's a civil lawsuit indicating a pattern of behavior. The best strategy is to try for a settlement. Admit guilt, pay a fine, and hope the judge is lenient." Maria felt the world spin, but I didn't. Steal. It was food that was going to the trash. My children were hungry. Doesn't that matter? The lawyer looked at her with a mixture of pity and pragmatism. "It matters to me. It doesn't matter to the system. I'm sorry." For the first time in her life, Maria considered giving up, not on fighting, but on existing. Because what was the point? She had done everything right. She had worked hard. She had tried to be worthy. And yet, the world had decided that she didn't deserve even crumbs. That she deserved to lose everything. She walked home. She didn't even have money for the bus fare, and on the way, she looked at the busy street and thought things she had never thought before. She thought that maybe the boys really were better off without her. That maybe she was the problem. That maybe the world was right. When she got home, the boys were with the neighbor. Maria picked them up, thanked them, and went inside. She put them to play in the living room and went to the bathroom, locked the door. She sat on the cold floor. And finally, she broke down. She cried with her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. She cried until she had no more tears. She cried until she was empty. And when the crying stopped, only emptiness remained. The dangerous, numbing emptiness of someone who has no more strength. It was at that moment that Hank appeared. He had tried calling. No one answered. Something deep inside, him, police instinct perhaps, or something deeper, told him something was wrong. He went there. He knocked on the door. Lucas answered. "My mother's been in the bathroom for a long time." Hank felt his blood run cold. He excused himself, went in, and knocked on the bathroom door. "Maria, it's me. Hank, are you okay?" Silence. He knocked again, harder. "Maria, open the door, please." More silence. He felt his heart race. He thought the worst. He was about to break down the door when he heard it. The lock turning. The door slowly opening. Maria was there, sitting on the floor, eyes red, face swollen, completely devastated. Hank came in, closed the door behind him, and knelt in front of her. What happened? And she told him everything. The civil lawsuit, the social worker, the former employer, the lawyer, the withdrawal. And when she finished, she looked at him with eyes that had already given up. "I'm going to lose them, Hank. I'm going to lose my children. And I don't know what to do anymore." Hank felt something break inside him, a deep, visceral anger he hadn't felt in decades. But, along with the anger, came clarity. The decision. He took her hands, cold, trembling, and looked into her eyes with an intensity that finally made her focus. "You're not going to lose them. I won't let you. Do you hear me? I won't let this happen." Maria wanted to believe, but she was too tired to have hope. "You can't do anything. It's the system. You're part of it." Hank squeezed her hands tighter. "Then I'll go against the system. It's not the first time I've chosen the wrong side. And if I'm going to make a mistake, let it be protecting you." At that moment, in that cold, tiny bathroom, their journey changed completely. It was no longer about a case. It was no longer about abstract justice. It was about two people who had consciously decided to fight against everything and everyone. And the danger of that, the real impact of that decision, was only beginning. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because the truth about moral dilemmas is that they don't appear with signs saying right and wrong. They appear disguised as impossible choices, where whichever path you take will cost you something precious. And Hank was exactly at that point. He had made a promise looking into Maria's broken eyes, holding her cold hands in that tiny bathroom that he wouldn't let them take her children away. But now, alone in the office late at night, with the city sleeping outside, and only the hum of the old air conditioner breaking the silence, he needed to figure out how to keep that promise without destroying everything he had built in 30 years of his career. He was treading on dangerous ground. Not dangerous in the physical sense. Hank had faced risky situations his whole life and knew how to handle them. The danger here was different. It was political. It was institutional. It was the kind of danger that destroys reputations, ends careers, and turns you from hero to villain overnight. Because if he helped Maria publicly, if he used his position to interfere in the case, the manager, that vindictive coward, would claim favoritism. He would shout from the rooftops that the sheriff was protecting a criminal. And worse, he would say why. He would insinuate things. Inappropriate relationship, corruption, abuse of power. And in a small town, where everyone knows everyone and gossip travels faster than the truth, these insinuations would stick. They would contaminate everything. And it wasn't just the manager he needed to worry about. If Hank pressured witnesses, the co-workers who had turned a blind eye, the clients who could confirm the harassment, anyone who could change the narrative, he could be accused of abuse of authority, of manipulating evidence, of unethical conduct. He had protocol for this kind of thing, clear rules about how researchers should behave. And Hank, who had always followed the rules, who had always been the epitome of integrity, was now considering breaking them all. Not for personal gain, but for something that seemed bigger than any rule, for real justice, not the paper justice that the system sold but rarely delivered. But he also knew with painful, absolute clarity that if he did nothing, Maria would lose everything. The numbers didn't lie. Mother facing criminal charges, civil lawsuit, inadequate housing, no resources. The system would take the boys away from her in a matter of days. They would place Lucas and Davi in temporary shelter while they searched for a suitable family. And Maria wouldn't survive this. Hank had seen it in her eyes. He had seen that emptiness, that dark place where people go when they have nothing left to lose. And he knew, professionally, statistically, that women in that state make permanent choices for temporary problems. He wasn't going to let that happen. He couldn't. On the night of the third day since he'd met Maria in that bathroom, the third day since he'd made that promise, Hank stayed late at the office. Everyone had left. The building was empty, silent, with that smell of stale coffee and paper that police offices always have. He sat in his chair, swiveled it forward, and stared at the plaque on the wall. It had been there since his first day as sheriff. A simple plaque, made of dark wood, with gold lettering engraved on it, serve and protect, for words that had guided his entire life, for words he had taken seriously when everyone else thought it was just a slogan. He had always believed in it, serving the community, protecting the vulnerable, enforcing the law not because it was convenient, but because it was necessary to maintain order, to ensure people could live without fear. And he had done it well. He had statistics to prove it. Low crime rates, high public trust, community respect. He was, objectively, a good sheriff. But now, for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in his entire career, the law was on the wrong side. The law was being used not to protect Maria, but to destroy her. It was being used by a cruel man to punish a woman who had dared to defend herself. And the system, the very system Hank had faithfully served, was allowing it to happen. The transformation that occurred within him at that moment wasn't sudden. It wasn't an epiphany. It was a slow, gradual crack in a foundation he thought unshakable. Because his whole life, Hank had operated on a simple logic. Law equals justice. If you follow the law, you're on the right side. If you break the law, you're wrong. Black and white, clear and defined. But Maria had shattered that logic. Because she had broken a rule, technically. Yes, she had taken something that wasn't hers, but she had done it for reasons any decent human being would understand. Hunger, desperation, maternal love, and the system, blind and stupid, couldn't see the difference between her and a real thief. So there was Hank, caught in the middle of this crack between law and justice, needing to choose. Follow protocol, stay within the rules, let the system do what it was going to do, keep his hands cleaner across the line. Use the authority he had, the influence, the 30 years of accumulated political capital, to protect someone the system had abandoned. And he knew that if he chose the second path, there was no turning back. Once you break protocol, once you put person above process, you lose your purity. You can no longer say, I always followed the rules. You become gray, complicated, human, and that scared Hank more than he wanted to admit, because his identity was tied to that purity. Upright sheriff, lawman, trustworthy. If he lost that, who was he? But then he thought of Maria. He thought of the boys. He thought of that hug in the bathroom, when she had broken down in his arms, and he had promised that he wouldn't let it happen. And he realized something fundamental. Integrity isn't about blindly following rules. Integrity is about doing what's right, even when it costs dearly. Especially when it costs dearly. He picked up the phone. He hesitated, put it back, picked it up again. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline, that feeling you get when you're about to jump off a cliff without knowing if there's a safety net below. He dialed. 3 rings. A hoarse voice answered. Hello. It was Marcus, a retired investigator Hank had known for decades. A man who owed no favors to the system because he'd already left it. Marcus, it's Hank. I need a favor. The kind that could get you into trouble. Pause. Then a low laugh. Hank Lawson asking for an illegal favor. I thought I'd never see this day. Speak. Hank explained, quickly, without embellishment. He needed someone to talk to the restaurant employees. Off the record. Without uniforms. Without threats. Just the right questions, asked the right way, to people who might want to talk, but were afraid. He needed evidence of the harassment, of the manager as a predator, of revenge. Marcus listened and whistled softly. That goes against protocol in about 5 different ways. Hank closed his eyes. I know. Silence. Then, when do you need this? Yesterday, Marcus laughed again. Send the names. I'll see what I can get. Hank hung up the phone and sat there in the darkness of the office, feeling the weight of what he had just done. He had crossed the line. He had set in motion something that couldn't be undone. And, the scariest part, he didn't regret it. For the first time in decades, acting against the rules he had always upheld, Hank felt morally right. As if he were finally doing the real job. Not pushing paperwork. Not processing protocols. But truly, genuinely, protecting someone. The following days were a dangerous dance. Hank continued to show up at Maria's house, but now with extra caution. He couldn't give ammunition to her enemies. He couldn't let anyone see and misinterpret, or worse interpret, correctly. Because the hidden truth he hadn't yet admitted, even to himself, was that this had ceased to be just about justice. It had become personal. He cared about Maria, not just as a case, not just as a victim, but as a person, as a woman. And this feeling confusing, inconvenient, dangerous, complicated everything. Maria felt it too. She saw how he looked at her when he thought she wasn't looking. She saw the concern that went beyond the professional. She saw the way he interacted with the boys, patient, kind, present. And that affected her in ways she wasn't prepared to handle. Because it wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper. It was the recognition that this man had chosen her. In a world that had repeatedly rejected her, Hank had looked at her and decided she was worth fighting for. And that, more than any pretty words, more than any romantic gesture, created a connection that neither of them knew how to name. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because what was happening between Maria and Hank wasn't that movie romance, where 2 people look at each other and that's it, they're in love. It was something much slower, much more real, much more dangerous, precisely because it wasn't in a hurry. It was a gradual emotional connection, built on small gestures that individually meant nothing, but together were creating a foundation too solid to be ignored. Hank began to appear with discreet but constant frequency. Not every day, that would be too obvious. It would give rise to gossip. But 3-4 times a week. Always with some plausible excuse. Always casual. Always with something in his hands. He would bring leftover food from the bakery. Bread, cakes, sometimes a whole roast chicken that he swore he'd bought, thinking he'd eat it all week. But you know how it is. It gets boring. Maria knew they were lies. Kind, well-intentioned lies. But lies nonetheless. Because a single man who lives alone doesn't buy a whole chocolate cake by accident. But she accepted it because she needed to. And because she was slowly learning that acceptance wasn't weakness, it was allowing someone to care. It was opening a door she'd locked for so long, she'd almost forgotten what it was like to have someone on the other side. He fixed things. The leaky faucet that Maria had put a basin under because she didn't have money to call a plumber. Hank showed up with an old toolbox, crouched under the sink for 20 minutes, and fixed it. He didn't make a fuss. He didn't expect exaggerated thanks. Just, there. If it leaks again, call me. He changed the burnt-out light bulb in the living room. He adjusted the door that wouldn't close properly. He fixed the stove that only worked on 2 burners. Small things that individually were nothing, but collectively said, I see you. I see your struggles. And I want to lighten the load. And the boys fell in love with him first. Lucas, the oldest, started waiting at the window. Is Sheriff Hank coming today? And when he appeared, the boy would run to the door with that huge smile that only a child can have, pure, unfiltered, unafraid to show affection. Hank would talk to him about school, about his friends, about soccer. Lucas would show him the drawings he made. Hank would look with genuine attention, ask questions, hang the best ones on the refrigerator. And David, the youngest, started following him around the house. He would hold his hand, he would ask to be held. He would show him his broken toys, and Hank would fix them. Or when he couldn't fix them, he would show up on the next visit with a replacement. I found this in a store and it reminded me of you. Maria watched all this with a heavy heart, because she saw in her son's eyes something they had never had. A reliable father figure. Someone who showed up. Someone who stayed. Someone who didn't make promises and then disappeared. Their biological father had been absent, even when present, and then simply vanished. But Hank was there, week after week, consistent, solid, real. And that scared Maria because she knew, with that bitter wisdom that comes from having been disappointed many times, that nothing good lasts forever. That eventually, Hank would realize how complicated it was to be involved with her. He would get tired. He would leave. And when that happened, it wouldn't just be her heart that would break. It would be the boys too. Because of this, at first, she didn't accept anything easily. Her pride was too wounded. Every time Hank brought food, she tried to pay. How much was it? I'll pay you back next week. He always refused. It was nothing. Never mind. When he fixed something, she insisted. Tell me how much the materials cost. I don't want to owe you. And he patiently repeated, I had some left over in the garage. I was going to throw it away anyway. They were uncomfortable dances, where Maria tried to maintain some dignity, some control, some independence, and Hank tried to help without making her feel like she was doing charity. But gradually, she realized something fundamental. He didn't pity her. Pity has a specific flavor. It has condescension. It has that look of superiority disguised as kindness. Hank didn't have that. He looked at her as an equal. He spoke to her as a person, not as a victim. He asked her opinion on things. He discussed news, politics, life. He treated her as someone whose intelligence he respected, whose opinions mattered. And that basic respect she hadn't received from anyone in years changed something in her. It began to melt her armor. It began to build trust. One night, After the boys had fallen asleep, exhausted from playing, they sat on the porch. It was the weekend, so Hank didn't need to wake up early. They sat there, on the cold concrete step, shoulders almost touching, looking at the dark small-town sky where you could still see stars. The silence between them was comfortable. It wasn't that anxious silence where you feel the need to fill the space with words. It was the silence of two people who were happy, just existing side by side. It was Maria who broke the silence, and when she began to speak, it was as if a dam had finally given way. She told things she had never told anyone, about the marriage, how she had met him charming, attentive, everything a 20-year-old girl thinks she wants, how he changed after the marriage, gradually, in ways she didn't realize until she was completely trapped. The shouting, the insults, the time he pushed her, and then cried, apologizing. The next time he hit her and said it was her fault. The control, the isolation, how he cut off her contact with friends, with family, until she had no one left but him. And how she finally escaped, pregnant with her second child, with a black eye and 50 rials in her purse. She talked about the double shifts, about working while pregnant until the 8th month because she couldn't stop, about Davy's premature birth, alone in the public hospital, with no one to hold her hand, about the sleepless nights in the first few months, the baby crying, another small child demanding attention. Her completely exhausted but unable to stop because if she did, everything would fall apart. About the exhaustion. That deep, bone-deep exhaustion that never goes away because you never truly rest. About the loneliness, that specific loneliness of always being surrounded by people, coworkers, clients, children, but never having anyone for yourself. No one who asks, "How are you?" and truly wants to know the answer. Hank listened to everything in silence. He didn't interrupt, he didn't offer solutions. He didn't try to fix things. He just listened, with that total attention that is the rarest gift anyone can give. And when she finished, when her voice finally faltered and she stood there, trembling slightly because she had completely exposed herself, he waited a few seconds before speaking. He let the weight of her words settle. He let her feel that she had truly been heard. Then he simply said, "You are stronger than anyone I know." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't exaggerated. It was said with a simplicity, a sincerity, that made Maria believe it. Because it didn't sound like empty praise. It sounded like a factual observation. As if he had assessed her entire life, weighed everything, and arrived at this inevitable conclusion. And something inside Maria, something that had been shrunken and hurt for so long, began to expand again. She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she really was strong. That surviving wasn't weakness. That continuing to fight day after day, even without hope, was the purest kind of courage. And then, for the first time in years, Maria did something she had sworn she would never do again. She allowed herself to be vulnerable in front of someone. She let the tears fall. She didn't try to hide them. She didn't turn her face away. She just cried, right there in front of him, letting years of pain and exhaustion come out in silent sobs. And Hank didn't run away. He wasn't uncomfortable. He didn't try to stop her. He just stood there, a solid presence beside her, and when she finally leaned towards him, he opened his arms and let her break down. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sexual. It was human. It was a hug from someone who understands pain because they've felt it themselves. It was refuge. It was a safe haven. It was the first time in years that Maria felt protected. Not because someone was fighting her battles, but because someone had chosen to fight alongside her. And that difference, small but fundamental, changed everything. How long did they stay like that? Minutes? Hours? Maria didn't know. Time had ceased to mean anything. Only that moment existed. His chest rising and falling with calm breathing. His scent simple soap, coffee, something vaguely woody. His hand on her back, firm but gentle. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Maria felt something beyond fear and despair. She felt hope, fragile, cautious, but real. When they finally parted, she wiped her face with the back of her hand and gave a humorless laugh. Sorry, you don't have to put up with my problems. Hank looked at her with a seriousness that made her stomach clench. Maria, I'm here because I want to be. Not because I think I need to be. Because I want to be. Do you understand the difference? She understood. And that scared her more than anything, because it meant he wasn't going to leave. At least, not yet. And the longer he stayed, the harder it would be when he finally did. But that night, she chose not to think about it. She chose simply to exist in that moment of real connection, of emotional intimacy she didn't know she was still capable of feeling. And when Hank finally stood up to leave, when he looked at her one last time before leaving, something passed between them. Not words, not promises, but a mutual recognition that their journey had changed. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about two broken people beginning to mend each other in each other's presence. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what Hank did in the days following that night on the balcony changed not only Maria's destiny, but the trajectory of his own life. He made irreversible decisions. Decisions that would leave permanent marks, regardless of how everything ended. And he did it aware of the risk, aware of the price, but unable to choose another path. Because some things, once you see them, you can no longer ignore. And Maria had become one of those things for him. The next morning, Hank woke up with the clarity of purpose that was almost frightening. He knew exactly what he needed to do. Marcus had obtained information 3 female employees of the restaurant who were willing to talk, as long as it was unofficial, as long as they didn't have to expose themselves publicly yet. Women who had seen the manager harassing Maria, who had been harassed by him as well, who knew about the revenge, the setup, everything, but who were afraid. Afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of retaliation, afraid of not being believed. Hank understood those fears, and he knew he needed to do this the right way, without pressure, without threats, without a uniform. He went to the restaurant on his day off, not in uniform, in civilian clothes, jeans, a simple shirt, a cap. He just looked like an ordinary guy. He waited outside, discreetly, until he saw one of the employees going out for her break. He approached slowly, respectfully. Excuse me. My name is Hank. I'm not a reporter. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not here to get you into trouble. But I need a few minutes of your time to talk about Maria Santos, the woman Carla. He later found out immediately tensed. She looked around as if someone might be watching. I can't talk about that. Hank nodded understandingly. I understand. But Maria could lose her children because of a lie. And I think you know that. Something changed in Carla's face. Guilt, perhaps, or repressed anger. She hesitated, bit her lip, looked at the floor. Then, in a low voice, 5 minutes, but far from here, they went to a cafe 2 blocks away. They sat in a discreet corner, and Carla told everything. How the manager had repeatedly harassed Maria, how Maria had refused, how he became obsessed, humiliated, furious, how he had planned the complaint. He waited for her to pick up the leftovers. He knew she did it. Everyone knew. Nobody cared. Until he decided he did. Hank recorded everything on his cell phone, with her permission. Then he asked, would you be willing to repeat this officially, if necessary? Carla swallowed hard. If it guarantees I won't lose my job, maybe. Hank repeated the process with 2 other employees. Same approach, same patience. Revelations, all confirmed the same story. The harassment, the revenge, the setup, and all, with varying degrees of hesitation, agreed to testify if there was protection. Hank had what he needed. Evidence, not yet in court, but enough to create leverage, enough to turn the tables. 2 days later, Hank went straight to the restaurant owner. He didn't schedule a meeting. He just showed up at his office, knocked on the door, and walked in. The owner, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, with the look of someone used to being abandoned, looked at him with irritation. Sheriff? I don't remember scheduling anything with you. Hank closed the door behind him. He walked to the desk and placed his cell phone there, right in the center. I have 3 recordings. 3 of your employees confirming that your manager repeatedly harassed Maria Santos, that she refused, that he framed her as revenge, and that taking leftovers destined for the trash was a common practice that no one cared about until he decided to turn it into a crime. The silence that followed was thick. The owner looked at his cell phone, then at Hank, then back at his cell phone. His expression changed from initial irritation to quick calculation. He was a businessman. He knew how to assess risks. What do you want? Hank leaned across the table. I want you to drop the charges. All of them. Criminal and civil. And I want you to fire the manager. Today. The owner made a face as if he had swallowed something bitter. And if I don't? Hank smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Then tomorrow, these recordings will be headline news. Restaurant sues single mother for taking food from the trash while covering up for abuser. Imagine the impact on the business. Imagine the customers. Imagine the labor lawsuit those 3 women will file. You're smart. Do the math. The impact was immediate. The owner picked up the phone, called his lawyer right there, and instructed him to withdraw all complaints against Maria Santos. Then he called the manager and fired him for just cause, without even giving an explanation. Hank left that office with a victory. Partial, but significant. The biggest threat against Maria had just been neutralized. But he didn't stop there, because he still had the social worker. He still had the unfavorable report. He still had the system evaluating whether Maria was a suitable mother. So Hank used all the political capital he had accumulated in 30 years. He wrote a formal report as sheriff of the city, attesting to Maria's character. He detailed the circumstances, the setup, the revenge, the fact that she was a victim, not a criminal. He signed it with the full authority of his office, and he personally delivered it to the social worker. The woman read the document with a skeptical expression. Sheriff, do you understand that this is unusual? You're putting yourself at personal risk here. If anyone questions it, Hank interrupted her. Someone will question it, I know. But what I wrote there is true. Every word. And if I can't use this uniform to protect those who truly need protection, then what the hell is it for? The social worker sighed. She had seen many children, many families, much misery. And perhaps because of that, or perhaps because something in Hank's gaze convinced her, she nodded slowly. I'll reconsider my assessment. But that doesn't solve everything. The house is still inadequate. The income is still insufficient. Hank nodded. No, but she won't lose her children. Right? Pause. Then. Right? When Hank told Maria everything that night, she couldn't process it immediately. She stood there, looking at him as if he were speaking another language. The complaint was withdrawn. Completely, and the civil suit, that too, and the social worker. She's going to close the case. Maria sat down slowly, as if her legs couldn't bear the weight any longer. Her hands trembled. I'm not going to lose them. Her voice was a fragile whisper, laden with a hope she was afraid to feel. Hank crouched in front of her, took her hands. You're not going to lose them. It's over, Maria. You're safe. And then she broke down. But it wasn't a collapse of despair. It was relief. It was liberation. It was years of tension finally letting go. She cried in his arms, but this time they were tears of gratitude, of disbelief, of something akin to happiness she'd forgotten how to feel. How do I thank you for this? How do I? Hank pulled her closer. You don't need to thank me for anything. I did what was right, but they both knew it had been more than that. It had been a choice. It had been a sacrifice. It had been love, even if neither of them was ready to use that word yet. The boys, who were playing in the living room, sensed something different in the air. Lucas came running. Mom, why are you crying? Maria wiped her face, opened her arms. Because we're going to be together, my love, forever. And she hugged her 2 sons, with Hank there, watching, feeling something in his chest that he hadn't felt in decades. Purpose, belonging, family. But the hidden truth that none of them were seeing yet was that the resolution wasn't complete. The manager had been fired, and men like him, small, vengeful men who lose everything because of their own cruelty, don't accept defeat. They don't simply walk away, they come back. And when they come back, they bring something far worse than lawsuits and social workers. They bring real danger, physical, unpredictable. 2 days after the dismissal, the manager started showing up. Not in front of Maria's house, he was too smart for that, but nearby, parking 3 houses down, observing, waiting, noting times, patterns, when Maria left, when she returned, when she was alone. And Hank, with his sharp police instincts, noticed. He saw the black pickup truck. He noted the license plate. He investigated, and he confirmed it. The manager hadn't left. He was there, observing, planning something. Hank then realized that protecting Maria from the law had only been the beginning. Now he needed to protect her from something far more dangerous. A man with nothing to lose and enough rage to do anything. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because what happened in that moment, when Hank looked in the rearview mirror and saw that black pickup truck standing like a predator in the darkness, changed everything. It changed the nature of the danger. Changed the type of protection Maria needed. And it changed what Hank was willing to do. Because it's one thing to fight against the system, against paperwork, against bureaucracy. It's quite another to confront a real man, with real anger, who has nothing left to lose, and all the motivation in the world, to do something terrible. Hank didn't start the car immediately. He sat there in the dark, watching in the rearview mirror. The pickup truck was parked 3 houses back, engine off, lights out, but he could see the silhouette inside. Just a shadow, but unmistakable. The manager, watching Maria's house, watching the windows where the lights were still on, watching and waiting. Hank felt something cold run down his spine. It wasn't fear. He'd faced too many dangerous situations in his life to fear a coward like that. It was something worse. It was the absolute certainty that this wasn't going to end well. That men who are fired and humiliated, men who have lost everything because of their own wickedness, are unpredictable. They are dangerous precisely because they no longer have lines they can't cross. He took out his cell phone, discreetly snapped a picture of the pickup truck, zoomed in on the license plate. He mentally confirmed what he already knew. It was him. Hank considered his options. He could get out of the car, confront the guy, order him to leave, but that would be hasty. It would give the manager an excuse to claim police harassment. He could call for backup, ask for a patrol car to drive by. But what were they going to do? The guy was parked on a public street. Technically, he wasn't committing any crime. Observing isn't illegal. Not yet. So Hank did the only thing he could do at the moment. He waited. He sat there, in his car, watching who was watching. 15 minutes, 20, half an hour. The truck didn't move. And then, finally, the lights in Maria's house went out, one by one. Living room, kitchen, boys' room, last, her room. And only then, only after. The house was completely dark. Did the truck start its engine and drive away slowly, unhurriedly, as if it had nothing to hide? Hank noted the time. He noted the direction the guy took. He noted everything. Because this wasn't paranoia. This was standard procedure. The manager was establishing routines, learning schedules, mapping vulnerabilities, and Hank knew this behavior. He'd seen it before in stalking cases, in the prelude to domestic violence, in situations that always escalated if not stopped in time. He went home, but didn't sleep. He stayed awake all night at the kitchen table, with black coffee cooling in his mug and an open notebook in front of him. He wrote down everything he knew, everything he suspected. Patterns of the manager's behavior, history of violence. He didn't know yet, but he was going to find out. Gun registration? Probably not officially, but in a small town, Everyone knows someone who sells unregistered guns, connections, friends who could help him with something stupid. Hank needed to know everything. Early in the morning, before sunrise, he was back in front of Maria's house. He didn't knock, he didn't want to scare her. He just stayed there, in the patrol car, parked where he could see anyone approaching, and he waited. When Maria went out to take the boys to school, she saw his car and stopped, confused. Hank got out and walked over to her. The boys ran to greet him, but he kept his focus on Maria. "I need to talk to you. It's important." She sent the boys inside to get their backpacks and looked at him with immediate concern. "What happened?" Hank hesitated. He didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't hide it either. "The manager. He was here last night, watching your house." The color drained from her face. Her hands instinctively went to her chest, as if she needed to protect her heart. "What? Him? Why?" Hank placed his hands on her shoulders, firm, stabilizing. "Because men like him don't accept defeat. But I need you to listen to me now. You're not going anywhere alone. Understand? Work, the market, anywhere that you call me, or you ask someone to go with you. And keep the doors locked. Always." Maria nodded, but he could see the panic beginning to build in her eyes. That panic she had managed to control in recent weeks. That feeling that things were finally getting better was being replaced by fear. Real fear. Visceral. "He's going to. He could hurt us." Her voice trembled at the question. Hank hadn't lied. He had never lied to her. "I don't know. But I won't let anything happen to you or the boys. I promise." And he said it with absolute conviction, even knowing it was a promise impossible to fully guarantee. Because he couldn't be everywhere all the time. He couldn't control every moment, every shadow, every danger. The following days were tense. Hank increased surveillance. He passed by Maria's house several times during his shift. He asked colleagues to patrol the area. Investigated the manager. You discovered he had a history. Nothing serious enough for prison, but several complaints of aggressive behavior. An ex-girlfriend had requested a restraining order years ago. Another had reported an incident that never became a formal case. The pattern was there. A violent man who had always gotten away with it because women were too afraid to take him to the end. And the pickup truck kept showing up. Not every night, but enough. The manager was clever. He varied the times. He varied the locations. Sometimes he parked 3 houses down, sometimes across the street. Once, Hank saw it on a corner near the boys' school. That was the last straw. Hank got out of the patrol car, walked to the truck, and knocked on the window. The manager opened it with that arrogant smile, that challenge in his eyes. "Sheriff, any problem?" Hank leaned in, resting his hands on the open window. "You know exactly what you're doing. And I'm warning you now, if you get near her, boys, or her house, I guarantee you'll regret it." The manager laughed. "Is that a threat, Sheriff? From a law enforcement officer?" Hank smiled, but there was no humor in his smile. "It's a promise." Maria felt the weight of it all. She saw Hank becoming increasingly tense, more protective, more present. He practically lived across the street from her house now. And she didn't know whether to feel grateful or guilty. Grateful because finally, for the first time in her life, someone was there, protecting her. Guilty because he was putting his own career, his own safety, at risk because of her. One night, when he was sitting on the porch after the boys had gone to sleeper, position that had become their routine, she finally verbalized it. "You don't have to do this, Hank. I don't want you to lose everything because of me." Hank turned to her, and what she saw in his eyes took her breath away. It wasn't just determination. It wasn't just a sense of duty. It was something deeper, something neither of them had put into words yet, but it was there, growing, impossible to ignore. "Maria, don't you understand yet? It's not about duty. It's not because I'm sheriff. It's because you matter. The boys matter. And if something happens to you..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The raw emotion in his voice said it all. Maria felt her heart clench in a way that was both painful and wonderful. Because she was falling in love with him. She had resisted, had tried to maintain emotional distance, had convinced herself it was just gratitude. But it wasn't. It was love. The kind of love that grows slowly, built on trust, respect, and constant presence. The kind of love that is frightening because it's too real to be ignored. She placed her hand over his. She said nothing. She didn't need to. They simply stood there, hands intertwined, in the silence of the night, knowing that something had changed between them. That they had crossed an invisible line. That they were no longer just sheriff and victim. They were two human beings who had met at the worst possible moment, and, against all odds, had created something beautiful in the midst of chaos. But the danger hadn't gone away. In fact, it was growing, because the manager had noticed. He'd seen Hank at her house. He'd seen the closeness, and that had added new fuel to his anger. It wasn't just about Maria rejecting him anymore. It was about Maria having found someone better. Someone who protected her. Someone who loved her in a way he would never be able to love anyone. And that realization transformed his anger into something more toxic, into obsession, into a thirst for revenge that wouldn't be quenched until he destroyed everything. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday night, everything escalated. Hank was on duty. He couldn't be at Maria's house all the time. He had responsibilities. Maria put the boys to bed, locked all the doors as Hank had asked, and went to her room. She was almost asleep when she heard it, a noise in the kitchen, glass breaking. She froze, her heart racing. She grabbed her cell phone, dialed 911 with trembling hands, and then she heard footsteps. Someone inside the house, walking slowly, searching, and she knew, with absolute terror, that it was him. The manager had broken in, and she was trapped there, with her children sleeping in the next room, without any form of protection. Now I want to delve even deeper into this, because what happened in those next few minutes is what separated Maria from becoming just another statistic, or from finally having a chance to live. Her phone trembled in her hand as the 911 operator asked questions she could barely process. "Is anyone inside your house?" Maria whispered a yes so low it barely came out. The footsteps continued, slow, deliberate. He wasn't in a hurry. He was savoring the power, savoring the terror he knew he was causing. Maria heard the operator say help was on the way, but on the way meant minutes. And minutes were an eternity when you're trapped in a room with your sleeping children and a dangerous man searching for you in the dark. She stood up slowly, each movement calculated so as not to make a sound. She went to the boys' room, locked the door from the inside, and pushed the heavy dresser against it. The boys stirred in their sleep, confused. "Mom," Lucas murmured. Maria placed her hand over his mouth, gentle but firm. "My love, we're going to play hide-and-seek now, okay?" Very quietly, David woke up too, sensing her fear even without understanding it. And there, in that small room, with furniture barricading the door, and two frightened boys in her arms, Maria waited. The footsteps reached the door. She heard the doorknob turn, testing. Then his voice, low but full of venom. "Maria, I know you're there. We need to talk." Talk, as if that were a conversation. As if he had come for anything other than to cause pain. Maria didn't answer. She just hugged the boys tighter, to her chest, and then she heard the sound she had prayed not to hear. He started kicking the door. Once, twice, the old wood began to crack. The dresser moved, but before he could get inside, another sound cut through the night. Sirens, closer and closer, louder and louder, and then tires screeching in the street, car doors slamming, voices shouting commands. The manager stopped kicking. Maria heard him curse. She heard footsteps running, coming back through the house. And then, Hank's voice. Loud, authoritative, from outside. "Police. Get out with your hands up, now." Sounds of fighting, shouts, more voices, and then silence. Maria couldn't move immediately. She stood there, trembling, holding the boys who were now crying softly, until there was a gentle knock on the bedroom door. "Maria, it's me. Hank, you're safe now." Open the door, and only then, only hearing his voice, was she able to move. She pushed the dresser with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She unlocked the door with trembling fingers, and when she opened it, Hank was there. Dirty uniform, tense face, but whole, alive, present. She collapsed in his arms. The boys did too, and Hank held them all, 3 of them, with a strength that was both promise and protection, and something that went far beyond professional duty. "It's over," he whispered. "He's been arrested. Home invasion, attempted assault, violation of a restraining order. He's not getting out anytime soon. It's over, Maria. For real, this time." And Maria, for the first time in months, maybe years, believed. She believed she could breathe, that she could sleep without fear, that she and the boys would be okay, because he had someone there who chose to protect them. Not because it was an obligation, but because he wanted to, because he loved them. Weeks later, when the dust had finally settled, when the manager was in jail awaiting trial, when the house had a new lock and an alarm installed, Maria and Hank finally had the conversation they had avoided, sitting on the porch, as they always did, but this time without the urgency of danger, just the 2 of them. "So," Maria began, with a nervous half-smile, "what happens now?" Hank looked at her with that intensity that always disarmed her. Now we live. For real, without fear, without hiding." He took her hand. "If you want that, if you want me." Maria felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were good tears. Tears of relief, of happiness, of something that felt very much like hope. "I want to," she whispered. "I want to so much." And when he kissed her finally, after months of tension and closeness and unspoken feelings, it was as if all the pieces finally fell into place. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending. It was better. It was real. It was 2 broken human beings who had mended each other and decided to stay together. They decided to build something new, something strong, something worth every second of the struggle to get there. Look, if you've made it this far with me, if you felt every word of this story, if it touched something in you, you're not alone. I tell these stories because I believe they matter. Showing real people with real struggles, finding real love amidst the chaos, is the kind of thing we need most in the world. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you want to continue following narratives like this deep, emotional, unhurried subscribing, here is your way of continuing this journey with me. It's your way of telling me that this is worthwhile. And look, I need to know if this resonated with you. So comment below. I'm with you until the end. Let me see how many people actually made it to the end and felt the weight of this journey. If this touched you in any way, and I think it did, because you're still here, leave a like so I know. It's not about numbers, it's about connection. It's about knowing that there are people on the other side who understand, who feel, who want more stories like this. And there's a video over here that continues in the same vein. Another story of real people, with real struggles, finding strength where they least expect it. Click and follow along with me there. Why this journey? It's only just beginning.